This story is titled, My Wife Tried to Rewrite My Will to Favor. My spoiled daughter without my knowledge, I found out and took immediate action. Hey everyone! Before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. Hey Reddit, this might seem like just another family story, but it's one I never imagined I'd be sharing. When you've been married for nearly 30 years, you think you know someone inside and out. You think you've built a life together on trust and shared values. But what happens when that foundation cracks, and you realize the person you thought you knew might not be who they seem? That's exactly where I found myself. So here goes. I'm Dan, 58 male, and I've spent my entire life building something I could be proud of. I grew up with nothing. My dad worked long hours in a factory, and my mom picked up whatever odd jobs she could find. We lived paycheck to paycheck, and there were plenty of times we barely made it. I remember being 10 years old and watching my parents argue over which bills they could afford to pay that month. It left a mark on me. When I got older, I promised myself I'd never live like that again. I worked hard, starting with part-time jobs in high school, then moving on to construction after graduation. Eventually, I started my own business in home renovations. It wasn't easy. There were months where I didn't know if the company would survive, but I kept pushing. Now, decades later, I have a comfortable life, a nice home, and enough saved up to retire in a few years. I married Linda when I was 30. Back then, I thought she was perfect. Smart, loving, supportive. We had 3 kids together. Mark, 32 male, Hannah, 29 female, and Sarah, 25 female. Mark and Hannah are the kind of kids any parent would be proud of. They worked hard, put themselves through school, and built good lives for themselves. Mark works in IT, and Hannah is a teacher. They've both been independent for years. Then there's Sarah, my youngest. Sarah has always been different. She's Linda's favorite, and everyone knows it. From the time she was little, Linda spoiled her rotten. If Sarah wanted something, she got it. If she made a mess, Linda cleaned it up. And if Sarah got in trouble, Linda was right there, making excuses for her. When Sarah was a teenager, she'd throw these tantrums if she didn't get her way. Not just regular teenage attitude, I'm talking full-blown, screaming, door-slamming fits. When I stepped in and set boundaries, Linda would back me off saying, "She's just a kid, Dan." Let her be. It got worse as Sarah got older. By the time she was in her 20s, she still acted like the world owed her something. For example, Sarah didn't want to work while she was in college. I told her I'd cover tuition, but she needed to get a part-time job for spending money. She promised she would, but every time I asked about it, she had some excuse. Either the job didn't work with her schedule, or the boss was mean, or the work was beneath her. Sarah would show up with new clothes or the latest phone, and I'd ask her how she managed to afford it. She'd shrug and say something like, "Mom helped me out." One evening, I brought it up with Linda. "Why are you giving Sarah extra money?" I asked her. Linda didn't even hesitate. "She's still figuring things out," she said, brushing off my concerns. I let it go at the time, thinking it wasn't worth a fight, but looking back, I realized that was a mistake. After graduation, it didn't get better. Sarah moved back home and refused to pay rent. She'd say things like, "The job market is so tough right now." Meanwhile, she was going out every weekend, buying expensive makeup and spending hours on TikTok. Linda defended her every time. "She's just trying to find her place," she'd say. "We need to support her." The thing is, I love my daughter. I want her to succeed. But there's a difference between helping someone and enabling them, and Linda couldn't see it. I've had countless arguments with her about this over the years. "You're not helping her grow up," I'd say. "You're just making her more dependent on us." But Linda wouldn't hear it. "She's our baby," she'd argue. "We're supposed to be there for her." One of the worst examples, when Sarah was only 17, she decided she wanted a brand new SUV, fully loaded. I told her she needed a steady job to afford it, but Linda jumped in, saying Sarah needed reliable transportation and brushing off my concerns about costs. A few days later, I came home to find Sarah browsing SUVs online with Linda's support. When I reminded them Sarah couldn't afford it, Linda dismissed me again, insisting they'd figure it out. I stood my ground, saying Sarah should wait until she was financially ready. Sarah sulked, Linda stayed annoyed, but in the end, the SUV never materialized. But it was a typical pattern. Sarah wanted something, Linda enabled her, and I was the bad guy for keeping things practical. That was the dynamic for years. Every time Sarah wanted something, Linda defended her needs no matter what. And every time I stepped in, I was painted as the bad guy. Now, don't get me wrong. I tried to have a relationship with Sarah. I wanted to guide her, to help her grow into a responsible adult. But she didn't like me. She saw me as the guy who said no, while her mom said yes. Still, I never imagined things would go as far as they did. I thought Sarah was spoiled, sure, but I didn't think she was capable of outright manipulation. And I definitely didn't think Linda would ever betray me like she did. It all started to unravel one evening a few weeks ago. I was in my study, going through some old files, when I noticed Linda's laptop sitting open on my desk. It wasn't unusual. She sometimes left it there. But something caught my eye. There was a document titled Revised Will open on the screen. I froze. My heart started pounding as I stared at the title. I hadn't talked to Linda about changing my will, so why was there a revised version sitting on her laptop? Against my better judgment, I clicked on it. What I saw made my stomach drop. The new will left almost everything. My business, our savings, the house, to Sarah. Mark and Hannah, who had worked so hard to build their own lives, were practically written out. And at the bottom of the document was my signature. Except it wasn't mine. Someone had forged it. I sat there for a long time, just staring at the screen. My mind was racing. Linda had done this. It was her laptop, her document, and her plan. She'd rewritten my will, forged my signature, and tried to cut out Mark and Hannah to give everything to Sarah. The betrayal hit me like a ton of bricks. I printed the document, slid it into a folder, and sat down in the living room to wait for Linda to come home. I didn't know how the conversation would go, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let this slide. That evening, Linda came home like it was any other day, casually setting her bag down and asking what I wanted for dinner. I couldn't hold it in. Linda, I started, holding up the paper. Do you want to explain this? She froze mid-step. Her eyes flicked to the paper, and her whole demeanor shifted. Where did you find that? She asked, her voice tight. Your laptop, I replied, keeping my tone even. The better question is why this exists. What were you thinking? Did you honestly think I wouldn't find out? She stood there for a moment, like she was deciding whether to lie or try to play it off. Finally, she said, It's not what you think. I was just drafting ideas. I thought we could discuss it. Discuss it? I raised my voice. You forged my signature, Linda. You didn't even mention this to me. This isn't brainstorming. It's betrayal. Her expression hardened as she crossed her arms. I wasn't betraying you. I was trying to do what's best for the family. Sarah deserves more than the others. She needs help. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. More than the others? I repeated. Mark and Hannah have worked hard to build their own lives. Sarah, on the other hand, has done nothing but take. And you want to reward that? She's our youngest, Linda shouted back. She's had a harder time finding her way. The others are fine on their own. And whose fault is that? I countered. Every time I've tried to teach her responsibility, you've swooped in to save her. She's 25 years old and still acts like the world owes her something. And now you're trying to give her everything at the expense of Mark and Hannah? This is beyond favoritism, Linda. This is manipulation. Her face twisted into a mix of anger and frustration. You've always been too harsh on her, she shot back. She's your daughter, Dan. You're supposed to support her. I have supported her, I said, trying to stay calm. I paid for her education, gave her a place to live, and covered her expenses for years. But support doesn't mean enabling. And forging my signature to rewrite my will? That's crossing the line. Instead of apologizing, Linda doubled down. You don't understand. Someone has to look out for her. If you won't, I will. Her words were too much. It wasn't just about Sarah anymore. Linda was actively working against me, justifying deceit in the name of helping our youngest. I stared at her, realizing that the woman I'd trusted for nearly 3 decades didn't see anything wrong with what she'd done. You know what, Linda? I said finally, my voice steady. This isn't just about Sarah. This is about trust. And right now, I don't trust you. Her expression shifted, like she realized the gravity of what I was saying. But instead of apologizing, she turned and walked away. I tried to keep myself calm. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, trying to understand how we'd gotten here. Was this who Linda had always been, or had something changed over the years? Either way, I knew one thing. I couldn't just sit back and let this slide. The next morning, I called my lawyer. I told him everything, about the will, the forgery, and Linda's justification for it all. He didn't sugarcoat it. Dan, this is serious, he said. If she had filed that forged document, it could have caused chaos for your estate. You need to protect your assets immediately. Following his advice, I locked away my original will and all important documents in a secure safe. I also froze any accounts Linda might have access to, just in case. The more steps I took, the more real it all felt. My wife, the person I thought I could trust the most, had tried to undermine me. But things didn't stop there. Over the next few days, I noticed Linda acting differently. She started spending more time with Sarah, whispering behind closed doors and making calls she wouldn't explain. It felt like there was a whole side of her life I didn't know about. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized how blind I'd been to the patterns that had been building for years. The worst part? As angry as I was, a part of me still hoped she'd come to her senses and apologize. But deep down, I knew this wasn't going to end with a simple, sorry. It was bigger than that. Bigger than anything I'd ever imagined we'd face as a family. And I had no idea what to do next. Over the next few days, things at home got tense. Linda was quieter than usual, but not in a reflective or apologetic way. It was more like she was biding her time, waiting for something. She spent almost every evening at Sarah's apartment, claiming they were working on some things. She didn't elaborate, and honestly, I didn't press her for details. I was too angry and exhausted to keep fighting, but the nagging feeling that something wasn't right wouldn't leave me alone. Then, one evening, Linda left the house claiming she was meeting a friend for coffee. I wasn't convinced. For weeks now, her friendly meetups had coincidentally taken her to Sarah's place. I decided to follow her. I waited a few minutes after she left and then grabbed my keys. Sure enough, her car led me straight to Sarah's apartment. I parked a few streets away and waited. An hour later, Linda came out, carrying a stack of papers. My heart sank. I couldn't see exactly what they were, but I had a pretty good idea. The next morning, I decided I couldn't let this go unaddressed any longer. When Linda came into the kitchen for her coffee, I didn't give her time to settle. "What were you doing at Sarah's place last night?" I asked. She froze, the mug halfway to her mouth. "What do you mean?" she asked, playing dumb. "You know exactly what I mean," I said, keeping my voice steady but firm. "You said you were meeting a friend, but I saw you leave Sarah's apartment carrying papers. Care to explain?" Her face flushed, but she quickly recovered. "I don't have to explain myself to you," she said, her tone defensive. "You do when it involves my estate," I shot back. "I know you're hiding something, Linda. If you don't come clean right now, I'll take legal action." That got her attention. For a split second, she looked genuinely panicked. Then she crossed her arms and said, "You're overreacting. Everything I've done is for Sarah. She needs help, Dan, and if you're not willing to support her, then I will." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So you admit it?" I asked. "You're working against me to rewrite the will? You forged my signature and now you're doubling down on this? Do you even hear yourself?" "She's our daughter," Linda said, her voice rising. "She's struggled her whole life. The other two don't need anything from us. They're fine. But Sarah deserves a chance." "A chance at what?" I asked, throwing my hands up. "She's had every opportunity handed to her on a silver platter, and she's done nothing with it. You're not helping her, Linda. You're enabling her. And now you've dragged me into it with lies and manipulation." Her expression shifted, and for the first time, I saw anger replace her defensive stance. "You've always been too hard on her," she spat. "You never believed in her the way I do. All you do is criticize." "This isn't about criticism," I said, keeping my voice steady. "This is about trust. And right now, I can't trust you. You've crossed a line, Linda. I don't even know who you are anymore." She turned and stormed out of the kitchen. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space she left behind, wondering how my marriage had come to this. Later that day, I called my lawyer again. "We need to move fast," I told him. I explained what I'd seen and what Linda had admitted. He sighed and said, "Dan, this is more serious than I initially thought. If she's already tried to tamper with the will and is still working on something, we need to act before she does more damage." We arranged to have a forensic expert analyze the forged document. Within a few days, the results confirmed what I already knew. My signature was fake. With this evidence in hand, I filed an injunction to block any attempts to alter or interfere with my assets. My lawyer also helped me secure tighter protections around my accounts and the estate as a whole. In the meantime, Linda's behavior only became more suspicious. She stopped trying to talk to me altogether, except for the occasional sarcastic remark. She spent most of her time out of the house, and when she was home, she was glued to her phone, texting furiously. It was obvious she was scheming with Sarah, but I didn't know what their next move would be. Then one evening, I overheard a phone conversation that confirmed my worst fears. Linda was in the living room, pacing back and forth while she talked. "He's on to me," she said, her voice low but sharp. "I don't know what else to do. If we don't act fast, it'll all go to Mark and Hannah, and Sarah won't get a dime." I felt a mix of anger and heartbreak. She wasn't just trying to help Sarah. She was actively plotting to cut out our other children. Mark and Hannah had done nothing to deserve this. and Linda's blatant favoritism had crossed the line into betrayal. That night, I locked up the house tighter than ever. I moved all important documents to a secure safe and changed the combination. I also installed cameras around the house, just in case. At this point, I couldn't trust Linda to respect any boundaries. The weight of it all hit me hard. This wasn't just about Sarah anymore. It was about Linda's complete disregard for our marriage, our family, and everything I'd worked so hard to build. I knew things would get worse before they got better, but I was ready to fight for what was right. I wasn't about to let her destroy everything. The realization that Linda and Sarah were actively plotting against me left me reeling. This wasn't just about a difference of opinion or a misunderstanding. This was a full-blown betrayal, and it shook me to my core. I spent the next few days going over every detail of my estate, every document, every account. I wasn't taking any chances. My lawyer had been a rock through all of this, guiding me step by step. He assured me that with the forensic evidence of the forgery and the measures we were taking, Linda and Sarah's efforts would ultimately fail. But, he warned, you need to prepare yourself. If they're already this bold, they're not going to back down easily. Meanwhile, things at home were unbearable. Linda barely spoke to me, except to hurl the occasional passive-aggressive comment. Sarah, of course, was in full victim mode. I'd catch bits and pieces of their whispered conversations. Things like, he doesn't care about us, or, we'll figure this out, don't worry. It took everything in me not to snap, but I knew better than to let my emotions take over. The breaking point came a few days later. Linda must have sensed that I was taking steps to secure my assets, because she suddenly started digging for information. She'd casually ask about my schedule or where I kept certain files. I caught her in my study more than once, rifling through drawers. Each time she'd let it slide with some excuse like, I was just looking for a pen. But I knew better. One evening, I decided enough was enough. I called a family meeting with Mark and Hannah. It wasn't an easy decision. I hated the thought of dragging them into this mess. But they deserved to know what was happening. Over coffee at Mark's house, I laid everything out. Your mother has been tampering with my will, I said, watching their faces carefully. She forged my signature on a fake document that would give nearly everything to Sarah. I've taken steps to stop it, but I thought you should know what's going on. Hannah looked stunned, her eyes wide with disbelief. She did what? She asked. Why would she do that? Because she thinks Sarah deserves more than you two, I said bluntly. She's convinced herself that Sarah is entitled to everything, even if it means cutting you out. Mark, always the calm and pragmatic one, leaned back in his chair and sighed. I knew Mom favored Sarah, but this is something else. I'm not telling you this to turn you against her, I added. I just want you to be aware. If anything happens, if she tries to involve you or manipulate you, I need you to be prepared. Hannah was visibly upset, but she nodded. Thanks for telling us, Dad. I can't believe she'd do this. But we're with you. Mark reached across the table and put a hand on my shoulder. You've done the right thing, Dad. If she's willing to go this far, who knows what else she's capable of? Their support was a relief, but it also reinforced the seriousness of the situation. Linda and Sarah weren't just a threat to me. They were a threat to the stability of our entire family. When I got home that evening, Linda was waiting for me. Where have you been? She demanded. I was with Mark and Hannah, I said evenly. I told them everything. Her face twisted. How could you do that? You're trying to turn them against me. No, I was calm but firm. You did that yourself when you forged my signature and tried to rewrite my will. They deserve to know the truth. She opened her mouth to argue, but I held up a hand to stop her. Linda, I've tried to talk to you. I've tried to reason with you, but you've made it clear that you're not interested in fixing this. You're only interested in protecting Sarah, no matter what it costs the rest of us. Her face turned red, and for a moment, I thought she might actually apologize. But instead, she crossed her arms and said, If you won't help her, I will. Someone has to look out for her. I shook my head, the last shred of hope I'd been clinging to crumbling. This isn't about Sarah anymore. This is about trust, Linda, and you've destroyed it. That night, I made the hardest decision of my life. I called my lawyer and told him to move forward with filing for separation. I couldn't stay in a marriage where betrayal and deceit had become the norm. It wasn't just about protecting my assets. It was about protecting my peace of mind and the values I'd spent my life trying to uphold. The next morning, Linda was served with the papers. She exploded, screaming and crying, and accusing me of abandoning her and Sarah. I stayed calm, refusing to engage in her theatrics. This is your doing, Linda, I said quietly. You made this choice when you decided to betray me. She packed a bag that same day and left to stay with Sarah. I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness as the door closed behind her. This wasn't how I'd imagined my life would turn out, but I knew I was doing the right thing. The fallout from my decision was swift. Linda and Sarah immediately went on a smear campaign, calling family members and telling them I was trying to cheat them out of their rightful inheritance. But I'd already prepared for this. I shared the evidence of the forged will with close family, and most of them quickly saw through Linda and Sarah's lies. The few who didn't, well, I decided they weren't worth my energy. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was regaining control of my life, but I knew the fight wasn't over yet. Linda and Sarah weren't the type to back down quietly, and I had to be ready for whatever came next. The days after Linda moved out were a whirlwind. She went straight to Sarah's apartment, and from there, the two of them launched an all-out offensive. I started getting calls from family members, all parroting the same lines. Why are you trying to disinherit Sarah? How could you leave Linda after all these years? Don't you think you're being a little extreme? Linda and Sarah had spun the story to make it look like I was some kind of villain. According to them, I was selfish, abandoning my family, and trying to cut Sarah out of her rightful inheritance. But I was ready for this. I'd already spoken to my lawyer, and we'd agreed to release key evidence: the forged will, the forensic report, and the steps Linda had taken, if it became necessary to defend myself. I started with my siblings. My younger sister was the first to call, sounding genuinely confused. Dan, what's going on? Linda's saying you've turned your back on her and the kids. That doesn't sound like you. It's not, I said, keeping my voice steady. Let me tell you what's really happening. I explained everything: the forged will, Linda's secretive behavior, and her blatant favoritism towards Sarah. By the time I finished, my sister was furious. She actually forged your signature? She asked. That's not just wrong, Dan. That's illegal. Exactly, I said. And now she's trying to manipulate everyone into taking her side. I'm not going to let her rewrite the truth. My sister promised to share the real story with the rest of our family, and slowly but surely, the tide began to turn. The relatives who had been quick to jump on Linda and Sarah's bandwagon started distancing themselves. It wasn't just about loyalty to me, it was about the sheer audacity of what Linda had done. But Linda and Sarah weren't backing down. Sarah, in particular, ramped up her entitlement. She started posting vague, passive-aggressive messages on social media about toxic parents and how she deserved better. It was embarrassing, honestly, but I refused to stoop to her level. The ultimate push came when Linda and Sarah tried to file a petition challenging the new will. My lawyer called me as soon as the papers were filed. Dan, it's exactly what we expected, he said. They're claiming the new will is unfair and that Sarah is being denied her inheritance. What are our chances? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. They don't have a leg to stand on, he assured me. The forged will, combined with the evidence of tampering, will sink their case before it even gets started, but we'll need to be thorough to shut this down completely. I wasn't worried about losing the case. What frustrated me was how far Linda and Sarah were willing to go. They weren't just fighting for money, they were trying to destroy my reputation in the process. It was vindictive, plain and simple. The court date arrived faster than I expected. I sat in the courtroom, flanked by my lawyer, while Linda and Sarah sat across from me, whispering furiously to each other. When the judge reviewed the evidence, the forged will, the forensic report, and the testimony from my lawyer, it was clear that their case had no merit. The judge dismissed it outright, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. But Linda and Sarah weren't done. After the hearing, Sarah confronted me in the hallway. "This isn't over, Dad," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "You can't just cut me out of your life like this." "I didn't cut you out," I replied calmly. "You and your mother made these choices. I tried to be fair, but you've shown me time and time again that fairness isn't what you're interested in. This is on you, Sarah." She stormed off, and I felt a strange feeling. For years, I'd tried to help Sarah, to teach her responsibility, to guide her. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. And now, I was done bending over backward for someone who only saw me as a means to an end. Back home, I began the slow process of rebuilding. I focused on spending time with Mark and Hannah, who had been my rock throughout this ordeal. One evening, Hannah came over with her husband, and we had dinner together. After the meal, she pulled me aside. "Dad, I know this has been hard," she said, her voice soft, "but I want you to know that we're proud of you. You've handled this better than I ever could have." Her words meant everything to me. After everything, I felt a glimmer of hope. I'd spent so much time feeling like the bad guy, like I was tearing my family apart, but hearing that from Hannah reminded me why I'd made these decisions in the first place. After the court case, the dust began to settle. Linda and Sarah lost their challenge, and their attempts to spin the story to the rest of the family fell flat. Once the evidence of the forged will and Linda's actions became common knowledge, most people distanced themselves from them. Some relatives still reached out to me, expressing disbelief over how far Linda and Sarah had gone, but by then I was done rehashing the story. The facts spoke for themselves. Linda stayed with Sarah after moving out, and from what I heard, their situation wasn't great. Sarah was struggling to keep up with her lifestyle now that she didn't have Linda to funnel money her way. Linda, on the other hand, seemed to have doubled down on supporting Sarah, even though it was clearly draining her. I couldn't help but feel a mix of pity and frustration. They dug this hole themselves, but it didn't make watching them spiral any easier. Meanwhile, I focused on rebuilding my life. The divorce process was swift, thanks to the clear evidence of Linda's betrayal. I was granted full ownership of my estate, and Linda walked away with a settlement my lawyer negotiated. It wasn't as much as she'd hoped for, but it was more than fair considering the circumstances. By the time the papers were signed, I felt a sense of closure. Not happiness exactly, but relief that this chapter was finally over. My relationship with Mark and Hannah grew stronger during this time. They'd been my anchor through the chaos, and I made a point to let them know how much I appreciated their support. We started spending more time together. Family dinners, weekend visits, even the occasional vacation. It felt good to reconnect with them on a deeper level, without the constant tension that had hung over us when Linda and Sarah were involved. One evening, Mark came over to help me with some repairs around the house. As we worked, he said, "You know, Dad, I never realized how much you were dealing with until all this happened. You've handled it better than I think I could have." I shrugged. "You do what you have to, Mark. That's all." "No, seriously," he said, setting down his wrench. "A lot of people would have crumbled under that kind of pressure. But you stood your ground. I hope I can do the same if I ever face something like that." His words meant a lot. I'd spent so much time questioning my decisions, wondering if I'd been too harsh or too rigid. Hearing Mark say that reassured me that I'd done the right thing, not just for myself, but for the family that truly cared about me. As for Sarah, I decided to let her go. For years, I'd bent over backward to help her, to teach her responsibility, to guide her toward a better path. But this ordeal made it clear that she wasn't interested in changing, not as long as she had Linda enabling her. I knew I couldn't force her to grow up. That was a decision she'd have to make on her own. So I stopped reaching out, stopped trying to fix things. It was painful, but it was necessary. A few months after the divorce, I heard through the grapevine that Sarah had tried to manipulate a distant relative into loaning her money. When that didn't work, she started bouncing from job to job, always blaming her bosses or her co-workers for why things didn't pan out. Linda continued to support her as best she could, but it was clear that their relationship was strained. I didn't take any joy in their struggles, but I also didn't feel responsible for them anymore. Reflecting on everything, I realized how much I'd learned from this experience. For years, I'd let guilt and obligation dictate my actions, especially when it came to Sarah and Linda. I'd convinced myself that being a good husband and father meant sacrificing my own needs, my own peace, to keep everyone else happy. But this ordeal taught me that there's a limit to how much you can give before it starts to break you. As I sit here writing this, I feel a sense of closure. My life isn't perfect. There are still wounds that will take time to heal, but I'm in a better place now. And if there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that lead to the most growth. For anyone reading this who's struggling with family conflicts or feeling trapped in a situation they can't control, I want to say this: stand your ground. It's not selfish to protect yourself. It's necessary. Thanks for sticking until the end.
Hi everyone, this is my first story. I need some help and it's a bit urgent. This matter is too personal to share with my friends, so I'm telling it here. I'm Diana, a 52-year-old woman, and have been a single mother to my 25-year-old son. I've raised him on my own since he was born. My husband passed away while I was pregnant due to an aneurysm in his sleep. I woke up to find him gone. Since then, I've sacrificed a lot, something other single parents can relate to. I'm not saying my son owes me anything, but a little appreciation would be nice. Unfortunately, my son told me a few days ago that he didn't want me at his wedding. His fiancée and her family think I don't look rich enough to fit in with their guests. This was incredibly hurtful. In a moment of weakness, I did something out of character. This all started 2 years ago when he began dating Lily, who comes from a wealthy family. Her parents own a top real estate firm in the state, and she's always dressed in luxury brands and owns 3 cars. In comparison, I'm just a college economics professor. I make a decent living, enough to raise my son single-handedly for the past 25 years. Things started changing when he began dating Lily. Initially, I had no problem with her or their relationship, but after our first meeting, my son called to tell me I needed to change certain things about my house because he found the old furniture embarrassing compared to Lily's parents' mansion. We fought over this because I didn't think there was anything wrong with my house. The old furniture had character and sentimental value, especially since some pieces were picked out by my late husband. I never wanted a glamorous lifestyle. I was happy living within my means. I valued the life I had and saw no reason to change it for anyone. After that fight, my son realized he was being a jerk and apologized. We patched things up, but he never brought Lily over to my place again. I only met her a handful of times and met her parents once when they got engaged. I attended their engagement party, but my son criticized how I dressed, saying I should have put more effort into it. But I thought I was dressed perfectly fine. I'm not stupid. I knew his real issue was that I wasn't wearing luxury brands, just clothes I could afford. He was too afraid to say it outright. Even though he started being distant after introducing Lily to me, I still tried to keep in touch. 3 days ago, he visited and told me that Lily and her parents didn't think I would fit in at the wedding. They felt I wouldn't blend with their friends and business associates. Since Lily's parents were funding most of the wedding, he thought it was best to respect their wishes. He suggested having a private ceremony later that I could attend, but he wanted me to understand his position. He didn't want me to feel out of place. I was very hurt and started crying. He got exasperated and said there was nothing to cry about because it was just a fact that I didn't look rich enough. He didn't want me to embarrass myself or him. He hoped I would understand, but accused me of being selfish for not caring about his image. Once I stopped crying, I told him to get out and never come back. He tried to argue, but I screamed at him to leave. Still upset, I decided to do something questionable. A couple of weeks ago, I had helped him secure the venue he wanted for his wedding. He had been struggling to finalize it because the owner wasn't willing to rent it out, despite negotiations from Lily's parents. They had even sent out invitations with that address. When he told me the owner's name, I realized I knew him from college. I thought I could help, but wanted it to be a surprise. I reached out and discovered the owner and his wife were worried about their property being trashed. I vouched for my son and assured them that Lily's parents, being top real estate firm owners, would ensure the place stayed pristine. It took a few days, but I convinced him to rent it out without mentioning my involvement. My son was thrilled, completely unaware of my involvement. That's probably why he felt confident enough to tell me I wasn't wanted at the wedding. After his visit, I was deeply hurt and decided to call the venue owner. I ended up sharing everything with him, even though I hadn't planned to. He and his wife were very kind and comforted me, even though we're not particularly close. They decided to back out of the deal, not wanting to be involved with someone so ungrateful. I thanked them, and the next day they returned the advance money and informed my son they couldn't rent the property to him anymore. This left my son and Lily's family scrambling to find a new venue with only 2 weeks to go before the wedding. Lily's parents were furious and even threatened to sue, but the contract allowed the owners to cancel up to 1 week before the event. They hadn't bothered to read the fine print. Feeling vindicated, I wrote a letter to my son explaining everything. It was a petty move, I agree, but he had hurt me a lot over the past couple of months, and I couldn't tolerate it anymore. I explained everything in my letter, and instead of posting it, I went to his house that evening, knocked on the door, and left the letter on the doorstep. I drove back home and blocked him to ensure he couldn't reach me. Later that night, he came over again, but this time he looked truly sorry. He told me he had read the letter and was there to apologize. He had no idea I was the one who secured the venue for him. He was crying and said he was really sorry for how he had treated me. He hadn't realized how much it would hurt me. Now, even Lily was upset, and he needed me to speak to the owner and fix the situation. With just 2 weeks to go before the wedding and all the invitations sent out with that venue's address, they were desperate. He started begging me to help, but I told him his treatment of me over the past months since he started dating Lily was unacceptable. The things he said were hurtful, and I didn't want anything to do with him anymore. I believed I had raised a good man, but his behavior had been shallow. He had chosen to side with his fiancée and her parents over his own mother. I reminded him that from his childhood I had sacrificed a lot for him, and all I ever expected in return was a bit of appreciation. Instead, he made it clear he was ashamed and embarrassed by me because his fiancée and her parents were not on board with me and found me embarrassing. He promised to take it all back, speak to Lily and her parents, and get them to apologize. But for now, he just wanted me to speak to the owner and fix the situation so they could keep their chosen venue. I told him I had already spoken to the owner and wouldn't keep disturbing them. They had to figure out a way to deal with this on their own, as I couldn't help them anymore. He started getting pissed off, saying I was being unreasonable. I told him to leave because I couldn't help him. Feeling adamant, I watched him give up and say I was free to do whatever I wanted. But if I didn't help him, I would lose him forever. He accused me of being selfish and said he was tired of balancing these pressures. He claimed Lily would be more understanding and that he was exhausted and done with it. Then he left. Since then, I've been worried about whether I made the right choice. So, I'm here to ask if I am the asshole for refusing to help my son get back his wedding venue. Update 1. It's been a week since I last spoke to my son, and I still haven't reached out to the venue owner. I've been conflicted, but things are clearer to me now. I realized I was just being sentimental. My son is old enough to handle this on his own. Besides, I don't think I could convince the owner to change their minds after what I told them. They seem pretty firm in their decision. I've spoken to several friends and relatives, explaining the entire situation. Many family members were surprised they hadn't received wedding invitations, so I told them the truth. My son was embarrassed by his family and didn't think we'd fit in with his fiancé's crowd. People were really offended, and when I told them about the venue situation, they felt my reaction was justified. My son hasn't spoken to me since our last conversation, and we didn't end on a good note. If this were truly important to him, he would have reached out again. There are just a few days left until the wedding, and I don't know what they'll do since the venue's address is already printed on the invitations. But I know it's not my problem anymore. If he doesn't want to invite me to his wedding or consider me his family, then I'm absolved of my responsibilities as his mother. I'm still processing this emotionally because it's quite difficult. As a single mother, my son has been my whole world. But in my mind, I've made my decision, and I'm going to stick with it. Update 2. There were just 2 days until the wedding, and I wasn't holding out hope that my son would reach out. But today, Lily actually contacted me. It was surprising, considering I thought she and her family didn't want me at the wedding. So why would she expect me to want to talk to her? Despite my reservations, I had a gut feeling and answered the call. I could hear Lily trying her best not to cry as she spoke. She admitted she knew about my fallout with my son, but begged for a chance to speak to me and convince me to fix things. She said some surprising things, like how she knew we hadn't started off on the right foot, and that she respected and admired me. She wanted me to talk to the venue owner and fix the situation, despite my current fight with her fiancé. She mentioned that my son had forbidden her from speaking to me but felt disappointed when she found out I wouldn't be attending the wedding. I snapped at her, accusing her of putting on an act. I reminded her that she and her family were the ones who didn't want me at the wedding, which caused my son to turn against me. There was silence on her end for a couple of minutes before she said neither she nor her parents had said anything like that, and there must have been a misunderstanding. Both of us were confused. I insisted that my son told me they didn't think I would fit in at the wedding, while she claimed he told her I refused to attend because I didn't like her and didn't approve of her family. We realized my son had been feeding us both lies. He was embarrassed and used Lily and her family as an excuse to avoid inviting me to the wedding, not wanting to show he didn't belong to their world. My head was spinning. I told Lily I needed a break and would call her back later to discuss this in detail. After half an hour, once I had processed everything, I called her back. We talked more, and I told her everything from the beginning. My son had always made it seem like she and her family had a problem with me. She claimed neither she nor her parents had said any of those things. She said my son had made it seem like I didn't like her family, which is why she kept her distance. When he decided not to invite me to the wedding, he told me one thing and told Lily I wasn't interested in attending because I didn't approve of her. He had even told her he was going no contact with me, and she needed to respect that. She never bothered to speak to me about it until now. I was incredibly hurt, realizing this was all my son's doing, not Lily's. Before, I could forgive him a little, thinking he was under someone else's influence. But now, knowing he did this on his own, there is no forgiveness left in my heart. After speaking to Lily, we were both disappointed. She said she had nothing more to say to him. We apologized to each other for the misunderstandings and hung up. It's been a few hours, and I'm just sitting here, unsure of what to do. I'm pretty sure Lily will cancel the wedding, and good for her. She deserves better. Unfortunately, I can't find a better son for myself. Every time I think about how much I have done for him and what he did to me, my heart hurts more. I'm sure he'll reach out to me since Lily and I now know the truth. But with what he's done, he's lost the right to call my house his home, and me his mother. Update 3. Since yesterday's post, I've been grieving the loss of my son. He's alive, but I know I've lost him. Even if he comes back, I'm not taking him in until I've dealt with this emotionally. As I predicted, with nowhere to go, he came back home. A few hours ago, someone started ringing my doorbell frantically. When I saw it was him, I decided not to open the door. I spoke to him through the intercom and told him to leave because after everything he had done, this home no longer had a place for him. He had a bunch of bags and looked exhausted, his face splotchy from crying, but I didn't let that weaken my resolve. I ignored it when he said he was here to apologize and fix his mistakes. I could hear the desperation in his voice, but I just tuned him out. He said Lily had kicked him out after their fight and knew we were both aware of everything now. He kept talking about how difficult it had been adjusting to Lily's world. He admitted he started acting like someone he wasn't and was sorry for being embarrassed of me and his family. He said it was all new to him, and he got so caught up in pretending that he forgot it was hurting me. He knew he had been selfish and probably didn't deserve forgiveness, but he wanted a chance from me as his mother, hoping I would be more forgiving than his partner. I told him I might have been more forgiving if he were truly sorry. Right now, he was just sorry he got caught. He needed a place to stay and didn't want to spend money on a hotel or finding his own place. If he were genuinely sorry, he wouldn't keep trying to justify his actions. He mentioned how difficult it had been for him at least 5 times since he showed up, so I didn't believe he was genuinely apologetic. I told him I might forgive him eventually, but for now, I wanted him to leave me alone. He then offered to pay rent to stay with me, saying he genuinely wanted to make things right. He claimed he could stay with friends, but I knew he was bluffing because Lily had told me he hadn't even invited many of his friends to the wedding. They probably weren't on speaking terms either. After a while of bickering, he snapped at me, called me heartless, and left. I know he won't be homeless. He has enough resources to find a place to live. My job as a mother is done. I raised him to be a decent human being, and for a while he was. But now, this is not my problem anymore. Update 4. It has been 2 weeks since my last update. On the day my son was supposed to get married, Lily posted that they had parted ways and asked for privacy during this difficult time. A bunch of people sent me the post. I felt bad, but not enough to reach out to my son. After he showed up at my house and I refused to let him in, he didn't contact me again. I guess I was right. He was just sorry because he got caught and knew no one else would speak to him. I decided to turn my back on him, and since then, he hasn't reached out to apologize. I'm fine with staying no contact. I've been living on my own for years, so being completely by myself doesn't make a difference. I'm not lonely. I have friends, family, and my life. My son just won't be a part of it anymore. Maybe I will find it in myself to forgive him one day, but it won't be anytime soon, and I am fine with that.
My boyfriend was transferred to the office where I worked, and that's how we met. I was in a senior position, so I couldn't be too informal with him at work, but I quickly realized he was a cheerful and humorous person. We interacted a few times at formal dinners, and that made me fall for him. One day, I bluntly asked for his number, and that's how we started talking. I had already fallen for him and was looking for a relationship, but I wanted to know how he felt about me first. We started hanging out, and I became even more impressed by him. This allowed us to get to know each other better. A few weeks later, he asked me out on a date. I instantly said yes, and our first date was the best day of my life. After dating for about 2 months, I suggested he move in with me so we could maintain a professional distance at the office, and because I craved to be around him. We moved in together, and we felt like the most compatible couple in the world. He was such a decent and caring man who worried about the silliest things, making him even cuter. We always made sure to make each other feel special and did anything to make the other happy. My family consisted of my mom and a younger brother who lived in the same city, while his parents lived in his hometown. He had met my family several times, and they loved him as much as I did. Since his parents lived far away, I never got a chance to see them, but they knew he was dating someone from his office. My boyfriend told me his parents were strict and protective, so it wouldn't be easy for me to impress them. I told him I had genuine feelings for him and respected his family, no matter what they were like. On my birthday, my boyfriend proposed to me, and I couldn't say no. I promptly said yes and hugged him with all my might. He told me he wanted to marry me in 2 months, and I told him I was absolutely ready. He'd had to see his parents to tell them about us getting married, so he left for his hometown the weekend. When my boyfriend came back, he looked worried and told me his family was not convinced at all. His parents were furious because he hadn't involved them or discussed it with them before proposing to me. I told him we could go and convince them. Maybe they would like me if they got to know me. My boyfriend called his parents and told them I wanted to see them, to which his mom replied she had no desire to see me and he could do whatever suited him. My boyfriend once again went to see his parents to try to get their approval, but they didn't even talk to him properly. They felt they weren't being valued and thought their son had been hypnotized because he had never made decisions on his own. My boyfriend returned and told me he didn't care about what his parents wanted because he was sure of his choice. He told me we were going to get married and didn't need his parents' approval. We started wedding preparations, but my mom was concerned and said my in-laws could create problems later in my life. I told her I trusted my boyfriend and that if he was taking a stand, I should support him instead of adopting him. We got married in a small, intimate event that included our close friends and my family. I was the happiest bride, and I bet my husband felt like the luckiest groom. We planned to announce our wedding to my husband's parents after returning from our honeymoon. A week later, we left for our honeymoon and had the best time together. When we got back, my mom told us we had to announce our marriage to his family soon, as delaying would only make things worse. My husband called his parents and told them we got married a couple of weeks ago and couldn't wait to see them. They responded by saying that since he chose another family over them, he could stay with that family because they would never accept him as their son. This worried my husband a lot, and his parents still weren't responding to his calls. A week later, my in-laws finally responded but still spoke rudely. My husband told them he was old enough to make his own life decisions and didn't need their support or approval all the time. His parents threatened to abandon him and never let him see them again if he kept acting this way. Then they invited us to their home, which made my husband glad they were at least willing to see us. I'm not getting a positive vibe from this situation. Just a few days before, his parents were cursing me and saying I had hypnotized their son. Now they're inviting us to their home. I asked my husband what if they had planned something against us. He replied that I was overthinking and making up situations in my mind because I was mentally exhausted. My mom also told me they were just trying to make up with their son as they couldn't lose their only child. We reached my mother-in-law's house in the evening, and they had arranged a lavish dinner. They greeted us warmly, told me I was beautiful, and said they were glad to see me. I was relieved that they accepted us as a couple and believed they would like me once they got to know me. I was convinced they were just being protective of their son, but my mother-in-law started asking about my family. When I mentioned I had a mom and a brother, she asked if my dad had died. I explained that my parents had separated long ago due to my dad's trust issues. She bluntly said that if my dad had doubted my mom, there must have been a reason. Ignoring her remark, she went on to say that women with such character ruin families. I lost my cool and yelled at her, asking how she dared to say that. My husband tried to calm me down, but I told him I wanted a divorce right away. We left immediately, and I locked myself in my room once we got home. My husband called my mom to talk to me, and she convinced me to open the door. You might think I overreacted, but I know how my mom dealt with her toxic relationship with my dad and how hard she worked to raise me and my brother. I couldn't bear a single word against her. My mom told me not to worry about someone who doesn't matter and to focus on my husband, who was by my side. After my mom left, my husband apologized for his mom's behavior, but said I shouldn't have asked for a divorce on the spot as it hurt him. He assured me he wouldn't talk to his parents until they apologized. A week later, my mother-in-law called my husband and wanted to see him. He refused, saying he wouldn't visit until she apologized. She lost her temper and accused him of being the worst son for disrespecting his parents who had sacrificed so much for him. He told her they weren't entitled to control his life and needed to apologize or risk losing him. After that call, his mom kept texting, accusing me of trying to take him away from his family. I took my husband's phone, called her, and warned her to stop or face consequences. She can respond, but continued texting him to show him what kind of person I was. A few days later, my father-in-law called and apologized for the mess, admitting my mother-in-law wouldn't accept me at any cost. He said he was embarrassed by her comments about my mom and wished he could have intervened. My husband told him he understood and had no issues with him. My father-in-law asked to see my husband, and he agreed to visit on the weekend. When my husband went to see his dad, everything was fine until my mother-in-law appeared. She told my husband she would only accept me on one condition. I could never see my mom again because she believed my mom was a bad influence. This enraged my husband. He told her that if she kept being so mean, he would stop seeing her. He warned her that if she didn't mind her own business, she would end up alone. I was amazed to see my husband take such a strong stand for me and my mom. Not caring about our marriage in the face of such an insult to my mom showed his strong character. He stood by my side, refusing to let anyone belittle my mom. Dealing with my mother-in-law was challenging. She was obsessed with her son and self-absorbed, unable to see anyone else in his life. She thought she owned his life because she had raised him. My husband and I both stood up to her rudeness because she couldn't understand love and respect. My husband, 37, and I, 34, have been together for 4 years and married for 2. He has a deceased son from a previous relationship, and I have a son from my former marriage. He and my son, 16, get along fine, but don't spend a lot of time together. My husband says it's because of school, activities, friends, and homework, but I believe if he really tried, he could find the time. My husband visits his son's grave every week, spending a couple of hours there with his phone off. Last week was his son's death anniversary, and my son had a football match. I told my husband it was a perfect opportunity to spend quality time with my son. He said he had already talked to my son, who wanted to go with his friends instead. I suggested we all go together, but he insisted my son should have time with his friends, and he had to visit his son's grave on the anniversary. I figured since we had already celebrated at home, the visit wasn't necessary. He got offended, insisting that visiting the grave was essential, especially on that day. An argument ensued, and I ended up telling him he should make an effort to spend more time with his stepson. He said his son matters too, and that unless I'd lost a child, I wouldn't understand. This upset me because it felt like he was implying I didn't love my stepson as my own and was using it against me in the argument. He left and refused to answer my calls. When my son came home, I vented to him. He told me I was wrong and shouldn't be too hard on his stepdad, who clearly has a lot going on. He said he thinks I'm overreacting and being paranoid for nothing. He assured me that his stepdad does give him time and attention, but that doesn't mean they have to spend every moment together. I don't know. Despite thinking I was hard on him, I feel like he's not making a real effort to spend more time with my son. My son probably said what he did just to get me off his back, but I'm not sure and need outside opinions on this matter. I am a 20-year-old woman, and my 35-year-old sister-in-law recently asked me to dye my hair back to a natural color because my 14-year-old niece wants to dye hers like mine. I have bright blue hair and love it. I've always been drawn to the alternative style and never saw an issue until now. My niece and I are close probably because I'm an adult closer to her age. She's taken an interest in how I dress, looking up to me and drawing inspiration from me while figuring herself out. I think this is sweet. Sadly, her mother seems to have a different opinion. My niece recently started asking for some streaks in her hair, and I guess her constant attempts to convince her parents have annoyed her mother. My niece's color of choice is the same shade of blue as mine, which is why my sister-in-law is now targeting me. One day, she messaged me asking me to tone down my look because it was influencing her daughter. She said she was worried people would think her daughter was a degenerate like many kids in our generation. Obviously, I took this as an insult, because if having colorful hair means you're a degenerate, that's what my sister-in-law thinks of me. I politely told her I wasn't comfortable changing my appearance just because she wanted me to. I tried to explain that my niece was trying to become her own person. My sister-in-law got quite mad that I wasn't going to change. According to my husband, she's always had issues with being told no. She told me that, as an adult in her child's life, I should want what's best for her child, and that I'm a terrible aunt and role model if I let people judge her child for copying my punkish look. I was highly offended. I love my niece, blood or not, and I like to think I'm a good role model. I try my hardest to be someone she can look up to and come to when she needs help. But apparently my blue hair makes me a bad aunt. I told my sister-in-law that my job was to be a loving support system, not necessarily a role model, and that she should talk to her daughter about what she really wants instead of attacking me. My sister-in-law got even madder and said my niece wouldn't be allowed to come over as often until I stopped dressing like a degenerate. I'm heartbroken that my niece can't come over as often now, but I don't want to change who I am. My husband supports me, but my mother-in-law says I'm being in a hole. Ah, yes, nothing convinces a teenage girl to conform like refusing to indulge even the smallest expression of individuality. Keep doing you. I have a feeling there's more to your niece looking up to you than just the smaller age gap. Even if you change your hair color, I'll bet there are kids at school that your niece sees every day with wild hair colors. These days, everyone seems to be coloring their hair non-natural colors, and they look great. I know a 70-plus-year-old woman with purple and blue streaks in her hair who lectures at church on Sundays, too. Hair color is less permanent than piercings. Your sister-in-law is just being silly if she thinks dyeing your hair will change anything.
My daughter secretly stole $300 from my purse, prompting me to punish her with 2 days of extra chores. Cleaning toilets, tidying the yard, and doing laundry. My husband erupted in anger, first shouting at me, then slapping my face in front of our 9-year-old son. In that moment, I decided to call 911 for help, but before they arrived, something unexpected happened that changed everything. My name is Sophia, and I want to share my story with you. It's a tale of resilience, pain, and ultimately empowerment. As I sit here in my small apartment in San Francisco, I often reflect on the choices I made and the life I've led, especially as a waitress at a fancy hotel. The long hours can be exhausting, but my job allows me to provide for my 2 beautiful children, Lily and Max. Lily is 15 now, a typical teenager who often challenges my boundaries. Just the other day, I caught her texting late at night, her face illuminated by the glow of her phone. I used to think this phase would pass, but it seems to grow more intense with each day. "Mom, I need this for school," she protests whenever I question her choices. I remember feeling so overwhelmed during my teenage years, and sometimes I find it hard to draw the line between understanding her and enforcing discipline. Max, my sweet boy, is 9. He's quieter than Lily, observant and perceptive. He has a knack for sensing when things aren't right. When I'm having a bad day, he'll come up to me, wrap his little arms around my waist, and say, "It'll be okay, Mom." His innocence gives me strength, reminding me of the joy that can still exist amidst the chaos. Then there's Mark, my husband, who is in his late 30s. I can hardly believe how our lives have turned out. He was charming once, full of dreams and aspirations. But as time passed, those dreams shifted, and so did he. Mark became controlling, criticizing my every decision, from how I manage the household to how I raise our children. His voice would rise over small disagreements, and I learned to stay silent to keep the peace. I remember one particular evening, returning home after a long shift at the hotel. My feet ached and my mind was spinning. As I entered our small apartment, the familiar scent of dinner cooking filled the air, but the chaos was unmistakable. Max was playing with his toys on the floor, while Lily sat on the couch, glued to her phone. The TV blared in the background, adding to the noise. "Lily, could you please help out a bit?" I asked, trying to muster some patience. She barely glanced up, muttering, "I'm busy, Mom." I sighed, understanding the battle I had on my hands. After putting my things away, I headed to my purse to grab some money for groceries. That's when I noticed it. $300 was missing. My heart sank. I knew exactly how much I had taken out for the week. I walked back to the living room, trying to keep my tone casual. "Hey, Lily, have you seen any money in my purse? It seems to be missing." Lily finally looked up, her expression shifting to guilt. "Oh, I meant to tell you. I took some for a school project," she admitted, her voice hesitant. "I didn't think you'd mind." I felt a rush of anger mixed with disappointment. "You took it without asking, Lily. That's not okay. It's about trust and respect." "But it was just money," she protested, frustration rising in her tone. "You're grounding me for this? It's unfair." "Grounding you isn't about punishment. It's about teaching you responsibility," I replied, my voice firm. I assigned her a list of chores for the weekend. Cleaning the bathrooms, doing the laundry, and tidying up the yard. "You'll complete these by Sunday evening." Lily rolled her eyes, throwing her hands in the air. "This is so dumb. I have a life, you know." As the argument escalated, I could feel my patience wearing thin. "This isn't just about money, Lily. It's about learning to ask before you take. I'm your mother, and I need you to understand that." Just then, the front door swung open, and Mark stepped in. His eyes darkened when he saw the tension in the room. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Lily took money from my purse without asking, and now she's grounded," I explained, hoping to keep it calm. Mark scoffed, shaking his head. "You're grounding her for taking a little cash? Seriously? You're being too controlling, Sophia." His words felt like daggers. "It's not about the amount, Mark. It's about honesty and trust. You make everything about rules and punishments. Maybe if you weren't so harsh, she wouldn't feel the need to hide things." Mark shot back, pacing the room. I took a deep breath, trying to maintain my composure. "This is about teaching our daughter the right values." "Right values?" he sneered. "You think you're perfect? You're the one turning my kids against me with your strictness." My heart raced as I tried to defend myself. "I'm not turning anyone against you. You're doing that by being unreasonable." Our argument escalated quickly, voices rising as emotions boiled over. I felt trapped like a caged animal. Then in a split second, everything changed. Mark's hand shot out, striking me across the face. The force knocked me back, and I stumbled, shocked and confused. "Mom!" Max cried from the hallway, his wide eyes reflecting fear. I quickly wiped my face, trying to shield him from the ugliness of the moment. "I'm fine, honey. Go back to your room, please," I urged him, my voice shaking. As Max retreated, I turned back to Mark, heart pounding. "You just hit me," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I didn't mean to, Sophia," he said, eyes wide with surprise. "No, you did. You crossed a line tonight. I felt the weight of reality crashing down on me. This couldn't go on. I needed to protect myself and my children. As I sat on the couch, the sting of Mark's slap still fresh on my cheek, I knew this was the turning point. I had to take action. The fear that had quietly crept into our home could no longer be ignored. I needed help. That night felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. After Mark left the room, I sat in silence, my heart racing as I replayed the moment over and over in my mind. The sharp sting on my cheek served as a painful reminder that the man I had once loved had become someone I didn't recognize. It was hard to believe that this was my life now. As I lay in bed, I could hear the muffled sounds of Lily and Max in their rooms, the normalcy of their evening routines contrasting sharply with the turmoil in my heart. I tossed and turned, unable to shake off the fear and uncertainty that loomed over me. I needed to talk to someone, but who could I trust? The next day at work, I decided to confide in my close friend and colleague, Jessica. We had worked together at the hotel for several years, and she had always been a source of support. Her kindness and sharp mind made her not just a friend, but someone I could rely on during difficult times. As I poured myself a cup of coffee in the break room, I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. Jessica walked in, her usual bright smile fading when she noticed my expression. "Sophia, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I hesitated for a moment before speaking, but the weight of my situation pushed me to open up. "I need to talk to you about something serious." "Sure, what's going on?" she asked, concern etched on her face as she leaned against the counter. I took a seat and recounted everything, the missing money, the grounding, the argument with Mark, and, most importantly, the slap. Jessica listened intently, her expression shifting from shock to anger as I detailed the events of the previous night. "Sophia, that's unacceptable. You can't just let this slide," she said firmly, her voice rising. "You need to take this seriously. This is abuse." "I know," I whispered, tears welling in my eyes. "But I don't know what to do. I can't just leave. What about Lily and Max? I don't want to break apart our family." "Staying in an abusive situation won't protect them," Jessica replied, her voice gentle but firm. "You have to think about their safety and yours. You deserve to live without fear." Her words struck a chord deep within me. I had been so focused on keeping my family together that I had overlooked the reality of the danger we were in. "Document everything," Jessica urged. "Keep track of every incident, every argument, and any manipulation. You'll need this if you decide to take legal action." I nodded, feeling a sense of determination building inside me. I had to do this, not just for myself, but for Lily and Max. They deserved a mother who could protect them, not one who cowered in fear. Over the next few days, I began to take Jessica's advice to heart. I started a journal, documenting each instance of Mark's controlling behavior and outbursts. I noted everything down: the times he raised his voice, belittled me, or manipulated the kids. I spoke to Lily about her experiences, and she reluctantly shared her own secrets, how Mark often told her to keep quiet about his anger to protect me. Each revelation pierced my heart, but it also strengthened my resolve. One evening, after dinner, I decided to confront Mark about his behavior. My heart raced as I prepared for the discussion. I needed to be strong to stand my ground. "Mark, can we talk?" I said as he plopped down on the couch, his face weary after a long day at work. "What now?" he replied, already sounding defensive. "I need you to listen to me. I'm concerned about how you handle things around here. Your temper is getting out of control, and it's affecting the kids." He scoffed, rolling his eyes. "You're just overreacting, Sophia. You always do." "No, this isn't an overreaction. It's serious. I'm scared for the children," I insisted, my voice trembling slightly. He leaned forward, his expression darkening. "If you keep pushing me, you'll regret it. You're the one who makes this place chaotic, not me." His words felt like a punch to the gut, but I stood firm. "I won't let this go on anymore. I'm documenting everything, and if it doesn't change, I will have to take action." Mark's face twisted in anger, and for a moment, I feared he would lash out again. But instead, he laughed, a chilling sound. You think you can scare me with your little threats? You're nothing without me, Sophia. His words stung, but I held my head high. I'm more than what you think I am. I'm their mother, and I deserve respect. After that tense conversation, I felt both terrified and liberated. I had finally voiced my fears, and while it hadn't gone as I'd hoped, I knew it was a step in the right direction. I couldn't stay silent any longer. I needed to reclaim my voice, not just for myself, but for my children. As the days passed, I leaned heavily on Jessica for support. She helped me navigate my emotions and reminded me of my strength. The more I shared with her, the more empowered I felt. However, I knew that Mark would not take my new assertiveness lightly. I felt a storm brewing, and deep down, I feared how he would react when he realized I was serious about standing up for myself. Little did I know, the turning point in my life was coming, and it would force me to confront not just my fears but the reality of my marriage and what it meant for my family. As the days turned into weeks, I continued documenting everything. My journal became a lifeline, a place where I could pour out my fears and frustrations without judgment. But each entry also reminded me of how far my life had strayed from what I had once dreamed it would be. I longed for peace in my home, yet it seemed to slip further away with every argument with Mark. One afternoon, as I prepared dinner, I could hear Lily and Max arguing in the living room. My heart sank. They were often at each other's throats, but I knew Mark's influence played a part. His anger seeped into every corner of our lives, turning my children against each other as they fought for attention and love in a household filled with tension. "Mom, Max won't let me have the remote," Lily shouted from the other room. "Because you always hog it," Max retaliated, his voice rising in frustration. "Enough," I called out, trying to regain control. I walked into the living room and saw their faces twisted in anger. I took a deep breath, hoping to diffuse the situation. "Let's all just take a moment. Lily, why don't you go outside and get some fresh air?" As she stomped out, I turned to Max, who was still fuming. "You know how to handle these situations better, right?" I asked gently. He nodded, though I could see he was still upset. The chaotic atmosphere made me uneasy, and I felt a familiar tension creeping in. That evening, I had planned a family dinner to try and bring us together, but when Mark came home, I could already sense his mood was off. "Why does it smell like burnt chicken?" he snapped as he walked through the door, dropping his keys on the counter. "Mark, Before I could explain, he cut me off. "You can't even cook a decent meal? What kind of a mother are you?" His voice was like thunder, shaking me to my core. Lily and Max, having returned from outside, exchanged worried glances. I felt a wave of shame wash over me. "I'm doing my best, Mark. We're all trying to make this work," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "You need to stop making excuses for your failures," he spat back. "You can't just keep messing everything up and expect me to stay quiet." It was as if my whole world had tilted. My heart raced as I processed his words. I couldn't bear the thought of my children witnessing another outburst. The last thing I wanted was for them to see their father in this light. I took a deep breath, trying to hold on to the resolve I had built over the past few weeks. "This isn't about cooking, Mark. This is about respect, and I deserve it too." At that moment, something in him snapped. He stepped closer, towering over me, and I could see the anger boiling beneath the surface. "You think you can just talk back to me? You think you can stand up to me after everything I've done for you?" I backed away, my heart pounding. "You're right, you've done a lot. But what you've done to this family isn't love, Mark. It's fear, and I won't let that continue." His expression darkened, and he raised his hand. For a brief moment, I thought he would hit me again, but instead, he let out a roar of frustration, slamming his fist into the wall beside me. The sound echoed in the room, sending Max scurrying behind the couch, tears brimming in his eyes. "Get away from him," I shouted, stepping in front of Max protectively. "You can't scare us like this anymore." In that moment, something shifted inside me. I realized I had to stop living in fear. I couldn't allow my children to grow up thinking that this was normal. Mark's rage was no longer going to dictate how we lived our lives. Just then, there was a knock at the door. Jessica stood there, her eyes wide with concern. I came to check on you, she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. What's going on? She asked, taking in the scene before her. Nothing, Mark barked, his temper flaring again. But I could see the anger in his eyes wavering as he faced Jessica. No, it's not nothing, I said, my voice firm. I can't keep living like this, and I won't let my children live in fear anymore. Jessica's presence seemed to shift the energy in the room. Mark, you need to leave, she said, her tone calm but authoritative. Who do you think you are? He spat, his face reddening. I'm someone who cares about Sophia and her children, Jessica replied, unwavering. You're out of control, and this can't go on. The tension hung in the air like a storm cloud. Mark looked from me to Jessica, confusion and anger battling on his face. I took a step closer to Jessica, grounding myself in her presence. I'm filing for divorce, Mark, I finally declared, the words flowing out of me like a dam bursting. This is over. You need to leave. His eyes widened in disbelief, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of fear. But then I remembered the resolve that had been building inside me. This was my moment of truth. I couldn't back down now. Mark's mouth twisted into a snarl, but instead of lashing out, he took a step back, realization dawning on him. You really mean it, don't you? I do, I replied, my voice steady. It's time for a new chapter for all of us. As he stormed out of the apartment, slamming the door behind him, I felt a mix of relief and fear. I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my life, and I could finally see a glimmer of hope for the future. But deep down, I knew that the battle was just beginning. The road ahead would be filled with challenges, and I would need all the strength I could muster to protect myself and my children. After Mark stormed out, an unexpected silence filled our apartment. I stood there, heart racing, my mind swirling with a mix of emotions. I could hardly believe I had just said the words, I'm filing for divorce. The weight of that declaration felt both terrifying and liberating. Jessica was still there, her presence a comforting anchor in the chaos. Sophia, are you okay? She asked gently, her eyes searching mine for reassurance. I think so, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm just scared of what comes next. What if he retaliates? We'll deal with that together, she said firmly. You're not alone in this. You have me and the kids. We'll make sure you're safe. As the reality of my decision began to settle in, I felt a surge of determination. I had finally taken control of my life, but I knew I needed to be strategic about the next steps. I want to file for a restraining order, I said, my voice steadier now. I need to protect Lily and Max from him. Jessica nodded. That's a smart move. We'll gather the documentation you need to support your case. You're doing the right thing, Sophia. The following days were a blur of activity. With Jessica's guidance, I collected evidence of Mark's abusive behavior, including my journal entries detailing his outbursts and manipulation. I reached out to neighbors, asking if they had witnessed any incidents or could provide statements. I also spoke to Lily and Max about what was happening, ensuring they understood that they were not to blame for Mark's actions. One evening, I sat down with my children, my heart heavy. I need to talk to you both about Dad, I began, taking a deep breath. Things have changed, and I want you to know what's happening. Lily, who had been fidgeting, looked up with worry. Is he coming back? No, sweetie, I reassured her. I'm filing for divorce, and we're going to be okay. I'm doing this to keep us safe. Max, still processing everything, asked quietly, Is he really bad, Mom? Yes, honey, I replied, my heart aching for their innocence. But we're going to make sure he can't hurt us anymore. You both have to be brave. I'll do everything I can to protect you. With every passing day, my confidence grew. I filed the paperwork for divorce and the restraining order, feeling empowered as I took control of my life. I felt the support of my community around me, friends, neighbors, and Jessica. They all rallied behind me, helping to create a network of safety. The day of the court hearing was nerve-wracking. I sat in the waiting area, my stomach in knots. Jessica was by my side, providing calming words and steadying my nerves. You've got this, Sophia. Remember, you're doing this for your kids. When it was finally our turn, We walked into the courtroom together. Mark was there, his presence heavy and intimidating. I could see the anger radiating from him, but I held my head high. I was determined not to let fear dictate my actions any longer. As I presented my case, sharing the details of Mark's abusive behavior and how it had affected our family, I felt a sense of clarity wash over me. This was my truth, and I was finally voicing it. The judge listened attentively and, after a short deliberation, granted the restraining order. Relief flooded through me. I turned to Jessica, tears of gratitude in my eyes. "Thank you for believing in me," I said, overwhelmed by the support I had received. As I left the courthouse, I felt lighter than I had in years. I had taken the steps to free myself and my children from the toxic grip of Mark's control. It wouldn't be easy, and I knew there would be challenges ahead, but I was ready to face them. In that moment, I understood the true meaning of strength. It wasn't the absence of fear, but the courage to confront it. Together, Lily, Max, and I could build a new life, one filled with hope, love, and freedom. The road ahead was uncertain, but I finally felt ready to embrace whatever came next, knowing that we were not alone.